I'm Steve Koster, and the three of us are going to do a presentation for wet floors. This really pertains to the plating industry. We got kind of a small group. The idea of this class is we're going to talk a little bit about the guidance document from the state that's come down. We're trying to get the word out to inspectors so when they go to plating facilities, they know how to deal with the conditions that they see at the facilities. We're trying to get compliance to be uniform across the state. So I'm going to talk briefly about the guidance document, and then I'll turn it over to Terry and Leon, and they're going to talk about specific cases. So rather than this class just be a real lecture on a bunch of material, it's really looking more at cases. So it should be pretty interesting. All right, so there's a guidance document. It's available. It's available on the CalCUPA website. Who's doing that? That's magically interference or something.
Pardon me, sir. I think there's 2 wireless remotes hooked up here.
Okay.
You need to use this one. We'll take you forward and
All right, and we'll take this one out. All right, so regulatory status of wet floors, metal finishing industry, floor management practice, or program. So there's 2 different documents. How many people here are from industry? We've got a couple. And then everybody else, I'm assuming, is from an agency? Okay, how many of you guys are inspectors? Okay, good. So the class is really designed for both industry and inspectors, kind of a cooperative. So, but we'll be focusing more on the DTSC guidance document. So what is a wet floor? This is not a defined term. If you go to Title 22 or if you go to 40 CFR, you cannot look up the definition of what a wet floor is. It's an industry term, and it refers to in a plating operation, liquids that come out of the tank, either from splashing, from washing, or from dripping. The class deals with wet floors where the material on the floor is a hazardous waste. So if it's not a hazardous waste, these things are not going to apply. The waste material must be characteristic waste. It can't be an F-listed waste, a P, a U, or a K. So we're talking about delisted waste codes. So how many delisted waste codes are there? How many options are there? 43. So there's 43 different choices. 4 of them are basically, well, 3 of them are characteristic, and the toxicity is a list. All generators for hazardous waste storage. Who does this affect? It affects generators, hazardous waste storage requirements, large quantity generators, tier permit facilities for the tank requirements. And this is like one of the big issues. If you have a wet floor, you need to avoid this, or your floor can end up becoming a tank. Hazardous waste storage options. This is what you can store waste in. You can store it in either a container, a tank, a drip pad, containment buildings, or miscellaneous units. These are your options. So if we take a look at a wet floor in mind, what is a container? It's a portable storage unit. Doesn't matter its size. A wet floor or a process floor is not going to be a container because it's not portable. A tank is a stationary device. So it doesn't matter how large it is. You can have 5-gallon tanks. If it's a stationary storage unit, then it can be a tank. This probably would best meet the definition for what a wet floor is. So if you look at requirements, they probably would fall under tank requirements. Containment building. It's a hazardous waste unit used to store, treat hazardous waste under provision of Article 29. Wet floors do not meet this definition. It's not allowed for generators. So this is not something that a plating facility would even be able to use. Drip pads, this is really designed for facilities like a wood treatment facility where they have material dripping off into an open area. Wet floors would not fall under this storage type, and it's not allowed for generators. A miscellaneous unit is basically, if it doesn't fall into the other categories, it would be considered a miscellaneous unit. And the important thing, it's not allowed for generators, so a plating facility would not be able to use that option. The definition of a waste. Now I'm talking just waste. A material that is relinquished. So if you look at what can be a waste, remember something has to be a waste before it can be a hazardous waste, right? So is it disposed of, incinerated, accumulated, material that is recycled, inherently waste-like? An example of inherently waste-like is dioxin. There's no good uses for dioxin, so if you had dioxin, the material would be a waste because you wouldn't be allowed to use it. And then mislabeled, deteriorated, damaged containers, they can become a waste. There's a time allowance for those before they become a waste. Plating tank process, drip and splashes, they call it drag out of plating bath material, fall onto the floor during typical operation. If the material meets the hazardous waste definition in 66261.3, the material may be relinquished. So remember, go back. Materials that are relinquished, accumulated, stored, or treated. So if it meets that definition, if allowed to accumulate on the floor, that would be the point of generation. Drag out from rinse tanks may be non-hazardous, but due to evaporation may become a hazardous waste. There's some operations where it's like rinse, it's very dilute, but as the water evaporates, it becomes more concentrated. Drag out on the floor if the spilled hazardous material is left on the floor for an unreasonable period of time. And this is not defined. So this was really the idea of the whole project with the Koopas in the state, was to make a determination of what unreasonable was. The material would be considered relinquished, therefore it would be a waste, and if it met the criteria, it could be a hazardous waste. By being left on the floor rather than being properly managed. So if you're storing it on the floor, it's relinquished. If it met the definition, it would be a hazardous waste. So you're then storing hazardous waste. If the material meets the hazardous waste criteria, it would be considered stored on the floor. So what is a reasonable amount of time? And this is basically an agreement. The waste regulations do not provide any objective standard in regard, and a case-by-case determination would be made. So this is not hard and fast. There is no written rules on this. It's basically like an agreement. The DTSC feels that the waste is left for more than the end of the work shift and no later than 20 hours, it would be considered unreasonable. So if it's unreasonable, then it's being relinquished. If it's relinquished, it's a waste, and then it can be a hazardous waste. So the point of generation would be on the floor. So that floor would then become a tank, and you would have to meet all the tank requirements. For hazardous waste tanks, under Title 22 states that releases to secondary containment shall be removed within 24 hours. So this was kind of where some of this was pulled from. It does not relate directly to a wet floor, but they're trying to come up with some point of consistency. So what management options do you have? There's actually plating facilities that look like that. Dry floor, this would be ideal, where you use splash guards and other engineering controls to prevent the material from landing on the floor. If you don't have any material on the floor, it's not wet. If it's not wet, it can't be relinquished, it can't be a waste, and you don't run into problems. So this is really the ideal. Can be done using tank connectors, splash guards, and other barriers. Floor is kept dry, there's no waste accumulation issues, and saves on lost product, treatment costs, and disposal costs. So it's ideal. It's a lot more difficult for a plating facility to meet that, but if they can, there are rewards. The second option is waste is not stored, and this is what we've been talking about a reasonable amount of time. The spill is cleaned up, the material would not be considered relinquished, hazardous waste requirements do not apply to the material at that point. So the point of generation would be when it's put into the waste treatment tanks or waste storage tanks. No tank requirements apply to the floor. So if we think about what requirements does a floor or does a tank have, you need to meet secondary containment for a tank, and that is what the floor is a containment. It doesn't have its own secondary containment. You have to do monitoring, and it has to be certified by a professional engineer. Very difficult to do. Option 3 is waste is stored, so the material is not cleaned up in a reasonable time, it's relinquished, it becomes a hazardous waste. The floor may be regulated as a hazardous waste tank or ancillary equipment. All hazardous waste tank requirements may apply, including tank assessment, certification by an independent professional engineer. It's hard to get a good engineer to certify a floor. And then option 4 would be the material is not managed within 90 days. Basically, they're operating as a treatment storage disposal facility. And these are the type of facilities that the DTSC is doing enforcement against. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Terry.
A lot of inspectors, you guys are all outfitted with digital cameras, right? Health and safety code allows us to take photos, take advantage of it. It's really good stuff. Anyways, I'll just jump right in. Oh, those wet floors, what are they? Why do they exist, and what can we do about it? Simple plating operation and anodizing. Put the little text box here to kind of explain. Low point sump, 3 feet deep. Interviewing my operator here, asking him, so how long has this been like this? Poor body language. It's a rare event. It's not always like that. Well, as it turns out, up until this point, it was always like that. This has a pump, a manually operated flip switch pump. Asked them how often do they pump it out? Truthfully, whenever they want to. So this was a bad deal. Underneath the floors, these are the raised floors, typically the older plating shops. They don't even look underneath those things. Out of sight, out of mind, right? You can see what happens. This is not water, obviously. There's usually pH issues, and you start getting deterioration. Lift up those boards. Look down in there, all kinds of goop. If you don't look for it, you're not going to find it. Everyone's seen this before, yes? Yeah. pH 1. Never mind my hand without PPE. Sorry about that. I was caught up in the moment. You guys carry pH paper when you're doing your inspections? You should. These, is it this kind of pH paper? The little cap that always falls off and your pH paper goes flying? They make them now with a little, like a Pez dispenser. They're kind of cool. This actually was outside of containment. This is the secondary containment. So this is where stuff is being dragged out. So this isn't even in containment. You can see, how long has this been occurring? Oh, not too long. What about the etching? It's been happening a long time. This is the same facility, opposite end. pH 14. Ask him, how come, where's all this stuff coming from? I don't know. We start looking around, it's not all drag out necessarily. I mean, this is a leaking tank. Dribble, dribble, dribble. They don't even address it. That's been happening for who knows how long. Months. Again, looking underneath. Swimming pools. I said earlier, you're dealing with caustic or corrosive conditions down here. You know, what's going to happen in an earthquake with these things? I think most of the state is a seismic zone, right? This is a facility. All of these pictures are from Orange County. All of these situations have been corrected, by the way. But this is a facility. I'm not going to name names. But obviously, this is no accidental spill. They purposely put a tote down there, and they bring out their acid rinse from their electropolishing operation. They just don't have room to do it, so they put it down there because they know that they're going to be spilling. So they try to catch as much as they can. Technically, that's a below-grade tank, right? UST? I don't know. People like to claim their epoxy resin flooring is chemically resistant to everything. That's not true. Severe acid degradation. Hydrochloric acid is marked right on their tanks. This doesn't happen overnight. This is in between tanks. Get it? You can see the picture. This stuff just starts piling up, piling up. Caustic tanks. They don't have the drag out control. Starting to see a lot more of that, though. The engineering controls they employ, they make the little curbing out of the plastic stuff. So if they do have to come across, it doesn't fall down in between the tanks. Anyone see the soda can? I just like that photo. Told this guy he's going to have to get rid of all this. He had to close for over a vacation, a 4-day weekend, and had guys with basically pickaxes going after this. That's how hard that stuff was. That's all from caustic drag out. But he was able to clean it all and restore it back. I should have had the after photos. This is another facility that's currently in enforcement with us. This picture is probably from, let's see, two years ago, about 3 years old, and we're still in the enforcement mode with him. We did not want to go administrative with this guy. He's with the DA's office right now. This, correct, yep. This is the walkway, and this is underneath. There's a little bit better photo. There's leaking pipes back here. You can see the suds coming up. You can't even get at that for maintenance. That's the thing. These older sites often they weren't, like I said, out of sight, out of mind. They weren't even designed to get down in there and clean stuff out. It becomes very, very problematic. This was underneath also. Look at all the highlights. Where's Waldo in here? You got gloves, PPE gloves. You got a drum bung cover, boards. There's another bung cover there. And this could be like what Steve Coster was saying earlier. This could be just rinse that over time evaporates and becomes concentrated and thus for probably hazardous. So when we say wet floor, it doesn't necessarily mean liquid. It could be hazardous debris also, just stuff on the floor. You know, you see wiring down there when they wire up parts, all kinds of stuff. Beer cans are really common, coffee cups. They may claim that their floor is sloped to a low point, right? But if they have this stuff's not going to make it there. So they have to get on a schedule and routinely get down there. It's a pretty dry floor. But again, low points. There's a low point trench. I don't know if you can kind of see there is water, liquid here. Facility. First inspection, re-inspection. Hasn't improved much. Third time is not the charm. 4 inspections. Now in Orange County, we have re-inspection fees. So we let them know after the first re-inspection, If I'm gonna have to come out here again, we're gonna hit you for $112 an hour. It's in our billing policy through the Board of Supervisors. That usually gets their attention after the first reinspection. Well, I got another slide too. That's a good question. I'm sorry, so you asked the question, is it good enough? So what's catching your eye? Did you used to be a food inspector? Sorry. We're not looking for restaurant, kitchen, hospital conditions on the floor. But I had someone ask me for moisture. Is moisture okay? I think so. I think it's okay. If it's pH 1, I'd probably have to re-wet it more, a little bit more to get a good pH. So if I'm not having to do that, you know, you start talking to these people, well, how did it get, how do I go back? Okay, he got from that, which was not okay, to that. What did he do? Oh, I fixed a leak on the tank. You know, well, if that was the reason it was there, then that's probably going to be pretty good for a while. If it's from sloppy workmanship and lots of drag out, how are we going to ensure as inspectors that this is maintained dry? We're not there every day. Who inspects once a year? Plating shops. Okay. In Orange County, we inspect every year. So if it's once every 3 years, even once a year, how do you know what the condition is going to be after the end of the shift or in the 24 hours at the most? We ask them to maintain a log at a minimum. I've had an inspector who the plating shop owner claimed that we run a 12-hour shift, one 12-hour shift. But in the morning, when they start up, it's dry. So I had the inspector just show up one morning at 8 o'clock. It was dry. He had like a half dozen shop vacs, and he's got a log, and he's doing it right. But those are issues that as this gets implemented, that comes up. How dry is dry and how clean is clean. But if we have the swimming pool, we know that that's not good. So as an inspector, if I'm seeing that, I'm probably, for right now, I'm pretty good. But we've been doing this has been instituted for 2 years, right? It had just came out 2 years ago, the policy. And in Orange County, we're seeing less and less of that because it's been a consistent message we're giving to our plating shop guys. And we're starting to see more and more of that. And we can focus our inspection on other things, 90-day storage, things like that, LQG. There it is. Is moisture okay? 2 years ago, I'm pretty happy with that. I'm not so sure if I'm happy about that now. This is a facility that had a horrible, horrible floor, and they took the initiative and moved all of their plating tanks out of this area temporarily. It was a big facility, so they had their other line intact. There's an anodizing section on the other side of this wall, so they had plenty of room. They just tore down this whole area, and they were going to redo their entire floor. Let me back up. Way back in this corner here is this. Epoxy coating's been eaten away. I don't know how thick these floors are normally, 4, 6 inches. But that the floor, the cement floor, had been eaten away, degraded all the way down to the soil in this area. I talked to the guys, they said they hit it with a pickaxe and they were right immediately into the soil. This is a steel I-beam. Looks pretty good here, but not down there. There it is there, there's the I-beam. And I don't know how old this floor was. It was original, I'm going to guess, because the area of the county, maybe late 70s. And the picture was 2005. See, you guys are, good question. I'm like, oh, someone's going to ask me that question. Well, there's a couple more photos, and then we'll talk about that. But thanks for recognizing that. Actually, there's a photo I didn't put in. To answer your question, let me back up a little bit. Yes. I don't know if you can see it back here. Looks like someone's digging out a grave. This hole back here is about 4 feet deep, and they found elevated levels of copper. And I don't remember what the numbers were, but it was significant enough they just dug it out. Saying it, I don't know if you and I talked about this place. They're not shut down, but it certainly is all kinds of memos and notes in their main file when that day comes. So, see, I don't know. Pardon me? Well, I saw the reports, and I'm not a soil cleanup guy, but they just over-excavated for that particular area. It's down about 4 feet, so I don't. Their professional engineer was confident that that's as far as it traveled. But I got some other photos in here on a different shop. My main point on this isn't about remediation, it's about showing what can happen to the floor over time if it's not dealt with. If this shop had been taking the initiative and not allowing the hazardous conditions to be on the floor, then this wouldn't happen. So that's kind of the point I want to emphasize here. Anyways, this is their new floor they're putting in. No plan check with this with us. There's kind of in the regulation, it kind of implies that there should be a plan check when they do stuff like this. But I asked for them to kind of allow us to come in and kind of take pictures along the way. And right away I saw that. Should we say happy hour on 3 real loud? So I have concerns about that. Initially, this place looked great. The last time I was there, about 6 months ago, you could not tell that that was a low point because it was full of liquid. So we are talking with them. They had an AEO for 90-day storage, and when they were done with this, they went to this side, decided they didn't want to do the anodizing anymore, took away all their equipment. This is kind of a side note. Decided not to clean the floor, but all the stuff that was wet on the floor turned into dry crystals. They used it for drum storage. And on the back side of this, you can kind of see the light. It's a roll-up door to the outside. Guys were walking back and forth, tracking that powder outside. There was enough for me to sample it, sky high in nickel. That went to the DA. Okay, getting towards the end of the slides here, I just want to show you this. This is a facility that no longer exists in Orange County, super old. The guy wasn't putting any money back into the facility. It was a job shop. He's just plating, collecting, paying nobody. Owner ended up filing for bankruptcy, caused the site to become an EPA Superfund that cost us $1.3 million. I never had the opportunity to inspect it when it was up and going. And I didn't take these photos. I wasn't about to go inside the place. Process area with tanks and catwalk removed to reveal containment below. Floor of sludge is approximately 18 inches thick of sludge. These are the guys cleaning it up. I don't know how much they got paid an hour, but it wasn't enough. That is not a fun job. The sludge was super high with concentrations of chromium, lead, and cadmium. This is how clean they got the floor. They took borings. The results showed soil contamination migrated off the property to the neighboring property. That takes a long time. Metals don't like to move in the soil very fast. But what helps the metals move along? Hydraulic pressure. You keep that liquid on there, it's going to be pushing and pushing and pushing. That's their boring. Here's cracks, though. Because people are, well, how does it get through the floor to the neighboring property? That's how. You can't see those cracks when you got the liquid and sludge on it, right? So over time, that's what happened. It's all fixed now. Any questions on anything? The photo's okay? Yes, sir.
I have a facility and I have them in the wet floor management plan so that they're not managing their waste in a tank.
Good. Hold on. Let me give you a microphone real quick. Is it on? Go ahead, sir.
We have a good, pretty compliant facility that has really always tried to meet the regulations, but they have trouble keeping up like most people. But last year kind of was a hot topic, the wet floor thing, and I started taking a look at it, and I wasn't convinced they were cleaning things up and doing things according to that. So I put them into a wet floor plan. I think I cited them for failure to implement their contingency plan in an appropriate manner to prevent a release, something like that. So they got on that, they implemented their wet floor plan, and I came back in and looked at the plan. They didn't do everything they said they'd do in their plan. One of the things that I noticed in the plan that I hadn't seen before was they have two, I don't know what you call it. I don't like to call it containment, because containment's a hazardous waste term. But they have an area where it drips onto the floor, it's collected at a sump and transferred to a tote. So I noticed in their plan, one of them said an unlined floor. It was a problem with their plan. They were doing daily inspections, but I couldn't tell what they were doing. Pump out, right? There wasn't a lot of diagnosis, there wasn't a lot of detail in there, but they were, they got the ball rolling. So, but then the other thing is, I'm wondering, where do we have the authority to look at the coatings or to make an assessment? If it's a tank, we can have an assessment done by an engineer, but if it's a floor and a coating, and I'm just wondering where we find some authority there to say that's adequate, it's inadequate. Testing, I'm not sure, if there's something we can look at there or what they should be doing. I've been to some plating facilities where they have a great liner and the integrity looks good and it's dry and I don't have any question, but it's concrete and epoxy. There's always blisters and bubbles, it seems, and things like that. So.
Yeah, I think I understand your question. So if he's conforming to the floor management standards, then the floor is not managed as a tank, right? So it's more back to being a secondary containment for hazardous substances, right? So you're questioning, he's got an integrity issue of his...
But there isn't a requirement to have secondary containment for a hazardous substance.
Right, so I'm going to say it's going to be deferred back to the fire department. It's going to be their issue at that point.
And there's areas in the fire code that cover the storage of hazardous materials over exempt amounts requiring containment. So if they fell under that, they would be required. It's not as stringent as if it is a waste. If it's a waste, they have to meet a lot more criteria. If it's a material, it's not regulated as stiff as wastes are. That's one of the advantages, is to not have it as a waste tank because the requirements are more stringent. If you can have it as a process floor and not fall under the waste requirements, you're much better off. But there still are some requirements. But they don't need a PE certification every 5 years to show the integrity of the floor.
Any other questions? Kind of makes sense? Okay, very good.